Dark clouds loom as rain hammers the windshield. With a deafening crash, the car careens off the bridge and plunges into the icy river. Panic explodes inside the submerged cabin, water rushing in, the world fading to blue. But just when all hope seems lost, a blur of gold and red streaks pass the surface. If you love heroic rescues, smash that and subscribe for more Super Retriever adventures. Every parent's worst nightmare began in a flash. The Mitchell family, Sarah, David, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, were driving home from a weekend getaway. The sun had dipped low behind the hills, and droplets of rain began to splatter the windshield as they crossed the old iron bridge. Suddenly, a loose section of guardrail gave way with an ominous clang. Before they could react, the car lurched, teetering on the edge. Heartbeats slowed as gravity took hold. The vehicle tilted forward, smashing through the weakened barrier. The world outside turned upside down in an instant. As the car plummeted, Sarah gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles. David's hand flew to the door, but the lock jammed. Lily screamed, her small voice echoing through the metal shell. "Mommy, Daddy, help!" The moment of free fall felt eternal, suspended in midair. Then, kaboom! The car slashed into the dark water with bone-shaking force. Water erupted around them, cold and merciless. The headlights flickered out. In that disorienting second, the cabin flooded with a deafening roar. Sarah's world was a tunnel of glass and bubbles. She reached over to unbuckle Lily's seatbelt, but the shifting angle made every move a fight against the current. David pounded the window, sending cracks spider-webbing across the glass. Water pressure mounted, pressing against the door like a relentless wave. Inside, Lily's tears blurred her view. Her lungs burned as she tried to scream, but only bubbles escaped. Sarah rocked forward, whispering reassurances she barely felt. Every surface was coated in panic. All around them, the river's current tugged and pulled, threatening to drag the car toward deeper, darker depths. Outside the car, the night was pierced by distant shouts and the insistent wail of emergency sirens. A flashlight beam danced across the swirling surface, hope flickering in the storm. But as the seconds ticked by, even the bravest rescue teams hesitated at the water's edge. The river was treacherous, and the clock was their enemy. Little did they know that far beneath the surface, a valiant figure was already on his way, a golden blur in a red cape, whose heart beat to the rhythm of courage itself. As the river's icy water surged inside the crumpled cabin, Sarah managed to pry her hand free from the seatbelt buckle. Her fingers trembled, but she worked with fierce determination, every twist and yank driven by maternal instinct. Beside her, David desperately searched for his phone amid the chaos, but the device had slipped beneath the dashboard and sunk out of reach into the growing flood beneath their feet. Time was bleeding away. Lily, wide-eyed and trembling, clung to her father's arm. Her sobs were muffled by the wall of water that now filled the lower half of the car. Sarah's heart pounded so loudly she thought it might burst from her chest. She knew they needed help, fast. Inch by agonizing inch, she fought the seatbelt mechanism. Finally, with a last heave, the metal clasp released. Sarah jerked free, the pressure of the water nearly sweeping her to and fro as she struggled upright. David grabbed her wrist. "Call 911!" he yelled, but his voice was swallowed by the roar. The water level had already risen to chest height, and the car had tipped farther forward, trapping the back half in deeper current. With each heartbeat, the risk of total submersion intensified. In a surge of desperate clarity, Sarah remembered the roadside emergency buzzer mounted to the guardrail they had shattered through. If she could reach it, perhaps it would summon help. Despite the frigid water and the disorienting tilt, she slipped from her seat and began to move toward the front, her boots scraping against the soft carpet that had turned slick. Lily whimpered, and Sarah whispered fiercely, "Stay with me, baby. I'm right here." She glanced through the murky windshield. Swirling silt and bubbles obscured her view, Darkness pressed in, and visibility was nearly zero. The car's interior lights had gone out seconds ago. Each breath felt borrowed. David shifted, easing Lily onto his lap, wrapping his arms around her. "We're okay," he said, though his voice quivered. He grabbed the door handle, testing it, locked and immovable. "Sarah, hurry!" Sarah reached the gear stick, half torn from its mount. With all her strength, she jammed it into park, hoping it would prevent further sliding. The car stilled slightly. Encouraged, she made her way to the passenger door and tried the handle. Water pressure slammed against the frame like a battering ram, forbidding any immediate escape. Outside, the emergency responders, already staging, along the bank, heard faint tapping and muffled cries as the car groaned under strain. They exchanged glances, uncertainty in their eyes. The river's current was swift. Any attempt to wade in risked their own lives. Radios crackled. "Victims trapped. Underwater situation. We need a diver." Inside, the current tugged at the car, rocking it again. Sarah felt a sharp jolt as the vehicle scraped against an underwater rock. The impact jarred Lily's head. She cried out, and the sound cut through Sarah like a blade. Panic clawed at her throat. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat and took deliberate, steadying breaths. Panic would kill them faster than the water. Sarah focused. She needed a signal. Scrambling back toward the dashboard, she located the small flashlight she kept in the glove compartment for emergencies. Retrieved with shaking hands, she clicked it on. Its beam fractured in the murky water, but was enough. "Help!" she screamed, pressing her forehead against the glass, illuminating the beam. With renewed vigor, she banged on the window in rapid succession. "Help us, please!" David joined in, pounding on the opposite door. Their voices and the staccato of fists seemed to cut through the current's roar. Above the din, a responder's voice barked into a megaphone. "Hold on! We're sending someone!" The realization that help was coming ignited a fresh surge of hope in Sarah's chest. Despite the cold biting at her lungs, she felt a spark, a promise that they might make it out alive. As the car quivered under the pressure of the river, and Lily snuggled closer for warmth, Sarah clung to that hope with everything she had. The next moments would decide everything. A sudden ripple across the river's surface catches everyone's eye, too deliberate to be a stray fish or wind-blown leaf. High above, dark clouds swirl, but amid the stormy sky, a flash of gold and crimson emerges. Super Retriever. In a nearby park, retired firefighter Marco Santos had been finishing his evening jog when Lily's muffled screams and Sarah's frantic pounding on the submerged car window echoed faintly through the air. Something in their desperate voices tugged at his instincts. Instincts he shared with his loyal companion, a golden retriever named Apollo. At Marco's command, Apollo had undergone extraordinary training, elevated scent detection, underwater retrieval drills, and simulated rescue scenarios, yet nothing compared to what they were about to face. Marco gripped Apollo's custom-fitted red and blue cape collar and snapped on the leash. "We've got a situation, boy," he murmured. Apollo's tail wagged once, an unspoken promise of courage. Together they sprinted toward the riverbank, their boots and paws slapping wet grass as distant sirens painted the scene in urgency. At the bank, first responders were setting up lines and flotation gear, but the raging current made their progress slow. Marco descended a rocky embankment, Apollo padding confidently beside him. Reaching the water's edge, Marco called, "Apollo, find them!" The dog paused, nose dipping low. Even through the roar of the river, Apollo sensed the trapped family. With a powerful leap, Apollo dove into the swirling water. The cape billowed behind him like a banner of hope. Under the surface, cold tendrils wrapped around his sleek body. But Apollo powered forward, guided by the echoes of Lily's cries and the scent of fear. Even with mounting pressure, his golden fur and red cape were a beacon in the murk. Above, Marco secured a safety line around his waist and dove in, following Apollo's trail. The water's chill stole his breath, but adrenaline lent him strength. In the dim light, Apollo's silhouette emerged near the car's rear window. He circled once, then dove under, searching for an opening. Inside the cabin, the water had risen past the dashboard, swirling around Sarah and Lily as they clung to each other. When Apollo reappeared, his wet muzzle pressed against the rear door, he gave a single urgent bark. It echoed through the pressurized cabin, a lifeline. Apollo toggled to his next trick. He had been trained to bite and twist emergency latches. His strong jaws found the small latch above the window and tugged until it yielded, spraying a jet of water outward. The window mechanism unlocked with a clang drowned by the river's roar. Hearing the release, Sarah's eyes widened. "It's him! He's here!" she gasped, voice cracking. David reached for Lily, who watched with wide, tear-bright eyes as the golden hero freed them from the metal prison. Back on the surface, Marco supported them as they broke through, Apollo paddling in circles like a vigilant sentinel. The family gasped in unison, lungs burning, before Sarah scooped Lily into her arms, tears mixed with raindrops as they clung together. From the riverbank, onlookers cheered. Flashlights, cell phones, and megaphones captured the moment. A golden retriever in a Superman cape, the very definition of heroic devotion. But their journey was only halfway done. As Marco pulled the family ashore and paramedics rushed forward, Apollo shook himself dry, eyes fixed on the swirling depths. Somewhere below, another challenge waited, and he would be ready. Beneath the roiling surface, the current had grown into a merciless torrent. Every second mattered. Marco Santos fought his way alongside Apollo, muscles burning from the chill and resistance of the river. Above them, rescue crews flung ropes and flotation devices, but none could match the precision and speed of man and dog in perfect tandem. Inside the sinking sedan, water swirled like liquid steel. Sarah's lungs pounded as she fought to stay conscious, cradling Lily against her chest. David pressed a hand to his wife's back, lending her his strength even as he struggled to keep their daughter's head above the rising tide. The glow from Apollo's cape, dim through the murk, was their only beacon. Marco spotted the car's passenger door tilting perilously close to a jagged rock ledge hidden just out of view. If the edge snagged the frame, the vehicle could rip open and collapse in on them. Shouts from the bank warned of sinking metal. Time was their fiercest adversary. "Apollo!" Marco whispered through clenched teeth, his voice steady despite exhaustion. The dog pivoted and surged ahead, heading for the fishtail of debris fluttering beneath the bridge. Marco followed, brushing hair from his eyes as the current threatened to yank him sideways. Within moments, Apollo dove under the car's rear, re-emerging at the driver's side. His nose quivered as he located Sarah's scent. He angled toward the rear passenger window and gave 2 loud barks, signals they'd drilled 100 times. Then he bit down on the window latch again, twisting and tugging until it popped. Free. A blast of icy water shot past his muzzle, but Apollo held firm. Through the newly freed opening, Marco could see Sarah's face, ghost pale but determined. He reached in, planting one arm under her shoulders and the other beneath Lily's small frame. "Hold tight," he rasped. David braced his feet against the dashboard, preparing to push from inside. With a grunt, Marco heaved, leveraging his entire body weight. Water gushed in, flooding the cabin even faster, but the car lurched free of the ledge's teeth. In that instant, the current slackened just enough. David shoved against the door, and together they forced Sarah and Lily upward toward the window. Sarah exhaled a breath she didn't know she held as her head broke the surface. She gasped for air, arms wrapped around Lily's little body. Marco lifted them higher, then twisted as Apollo surfaced beside him, his tongue lolling in what looked like a triumphant grin. David clambered out next, scrambling onto the bank as paramedics lunged forward with blankets and stretchers. Marco handed Lily into Sarah's arms, kneeling to check them both. Apollo shook once, shedding droplets that sparkled in the flashlight beams, then sat obediently at Marco's side. Behind them, the river churned ominously, whispering of dangers left beneath its surface. But on the bank, cheers broke the night's tension. Phones captured the moment Apollo trotted forward, chest puffed, cape fluttering like a banner of hope. The Mitchells were safe, and all thanks to the courage of a golden retriever who refused to let time win. As medics wrapped Lily in a thermal blanket and Sarah leaned against David, tears flowing freely, Apollo's ears perked. He glanced back at the water, ready for whatever lay ahead. Because for Super Retriever, every second, no matter how fleeting, was worth racing against. A chill gripped Super Retriever's spine as he dove beneath the turbulent surface. The river's roar faded into a muffled hum, replaced by the rhythmic pulse of his own heartbeat. Golden fur bristled with cold, each stroke propelled by powerful webbed paws. Apollo's red cape fluttered like an ember in the murky blue, guiding him deeper toward the trapped sedan's shadow. Light from above fractured into dancing beams that cut through swirling silt. Every kick stirred up sediment, turning visibility to a ghostly haze. Yet Apollo's senses thrived in the gloom. The scent of fear and the faint echo of Lily's sobs guided his path more surely than any spotlight. He angled downward, navigating, past twisted metal wreckage and submerged branches that scraped his sides. The car's outline emerged, a warped silhouette against the rocky riverbed. Its windows were cracked, one gaping like a broken eye socket. Water pressure groaned as Super Retriever approached, and he could almost feel the cabin's frantic energy, bubbling cries muffled by the metal shell. He circled once, then settled, beneath the back passenger window, positioning himself to work his rescue magic. Apollo paused, inhaling sharply through his nose. The latch above the window, half buried in silt, was his target. He clamped his strong jaws around the metal lever and tugged. The mechanism resisted, but he twisted with patience and practiced precision. Finally, the latch gave way with a metallic click that vibrated through the water. A rush of ice-cold river water whooshed into the cabin, but Super Retriever held firm. Paws braced against the car's frame. Inside, Sarah's focus was razor-sharp. As water flooded around her, she felt Apollo's presence before she saw him, a reassuring solidity pressing against the glass. Lily's sobs trapped in her throat, Sarah scrambled to the rear passenger seat as far from the rising current as possible. The sudden rush of water through the newly freed window created an air pocket, and Sarah seized it, holding Lily tight and angling her head toward the opening. Apollo barked once, a tremor of sound that carried clearly through the air. Pocket. It was the signal. He'd unlocked their only exit. Marco's strong arms, thrust through the opening, caught Sarah's shoulders. With Lily cradled against her chest, Sarah felt salvation at her back. But the fight against the depths wasn't over. The car was still sinking, and the currents pressed relentlessly. Apollo swam ahead to scout the path, his body sleek and undeterred. He nudged aside a fallen branch, clearing a narrow corridor between jagged rocks. Marco followed, guiding Sarah and Lily in a tight streamline. Each kick brought them closer to the daylight above, but the weight of water and metal threatened to drag them back. Sarah's lungs burned as she kicked toward the surface. Lily clung to her neck, bubbles trailing from her small nostrils. Just when despair nearly claimed her, a shaft of moonlight burst through the water, an open path. Together they surged upward, Super Retriever's bark echoing like a trumpet of hope. Then, breaking the surface, the trio gasped in unison, lungs flooding with night air. Apollo paddled circles around them, his cape a fluttering flag of victory. On the bank, floodlights illuminated the scene. Paramedics waded in with blankets, and onlookers cheered in awe. Though shaking with cold and adrenaline, Sarah held Lily close, tears and raindrops mingling on her face. Marco guided them ashore as Apollo sat proudly at the water's edge, chest heaving, eyes bright with purpose. In that moment, the river's depths had tested them all, but it was Super Retriever, who had shown that true courage knows no bounds, not even those imposed by the darkest, coldest waters. The jagged silhouette of the sedan lay half buried in the riverbed, its frame twisted by the violent plunge and the relentless current. Super Retriever, Apollo, emerged first, shaking droplets from his golden coat as he assessed the scene. The car's rear half was buried in slippery silt, while the front end sagged into deeper water, glass strewn like fractured stars. Inside, Sarah, David, and Lily huddled together on the back seat, the air pocket they'd created growing thin with each passing heartbeat. Marco Santos arrived moments later, sloshing through waist-high water with a coil of rope over his shoulder. Behind him, rescue crews circled in inflatable boats, eyes wide at the sight of a dog in a cape leading the charge. Marco called out, voice booming across the churning surface, "Apollo, guide me in!" Without hesitation, Apollo dove beneath the surface, weaving between uprooted branches and submerged guardrail fragments. He tapped the rear passenger window with his nose, once, twice, and then darted under the car's belly toward the front door. Marco followed, securing one end of the rope around his waist and anchoring the other on shore. Inside, the cramped cabin rattled as the currents tugged at every seam. Water had risen above the dashboard, and the front seats were almost entirely submerged. Sarah pressed Lily against her chest and gripped David's arm, each breath a precious treasure. Light filtered through cracks in the roof, creating ghostly beams that danced across the upholstery. Apollo resurfaced at the front passenger side, nose pressed to a jammed door latch. He worked methodically, biting, twisting, leveraging against the frame. Metal groaned in protest, but Apollo's determination never wavered. Finally, with a resonant click, the latch released. A torrent of chilly water exploded inward, but it also created the surge they needed to shift the car's weight. Marco grasped the open door and braced himself against the rocky riverbed. He planted his feet firmly on the slippery stones, then wedged his shoulder against the frame. "On three!" he called through gritted teeth. "1, 2, 3! With a heave that rattled his bones, he pushed the door outward. It gave way in a shower of water and mud. Through the opening, Marco reached inside and grabbed Sarah's wrist. David followed suit from the rear, lifting Lily upward into the gushing stream. Sarah kicked off the floor mats, propelling herself, and her daughter into the handful of air above the door. The current grabbed at their legs, but Marco held tight, his strong arms anchoring them to safety. Emerging onto the riverbank, Sarah collapsed into his embrace, Lily tucked against her. Chest like a fragile treasure, David scrambled free next, water sluicing from his soaked clothes. Marco wrapped the family in a thick thermal blanket as paramedics waded forward, their radios crackling with relief and awe. Apollo swam circles in the shallow water, tongue lolling, and tail wagging, a beacon of triumph. His cape, streaked with mud and debris, fluttered behind him like a proud banner. The onlookers cheered, some wiping tears as the heroic dog bounded onto the shore to nuzzle Lily's cheek. Though the car remained half-submerged, its twisted metal no longer a prison, the family was reunited and safe. The river had tested their limits, but it was Super Retriever's courage and Marco's steadfast resolve that turned despair into deliverance. As paramedics loaded Sarah and Lily onto stretchers and comforted them with gentle words, David knelt beside Apollo, wrapping an arm around his broad shoulders. "You did it, boy," he whispered. Apollo's ears perked, and he leaned into the touch, eyes shining with calm pride. Behind them, the river resumed its steady flow, as if nothing had happened. But on the bank, one family stood together, hearts full of gratitude, and Super Retriever, man, dog, and legend sat at their side, cape fluttering in the breeze, ready for whatever challenge the next current might bring. As the Mitchell family huddled on the riverbank, tremors of shock and relief still coursed through their bodies. Lily's small frame shook uncontrollably, her tears mingling with raindrops. Sarah rocked her daughter gently, whispering soothing words even as her own voice quavered. David stood guard beside them, scanning the scene for any further danger. Yet amid the chaos, a steady warmth broke through, a golden blur padding toward them, cape billowing like a gentle breeze. Apollo approached with careful steps, sensing the family's fragile state. He sat a few feet away, tilted his head, and let out a soft, comforting whine. His eyes, pools of deep amber, radiated empathy. For a moment, the world's harsh sounds, the rushing river, crackling radios, distant sirens, faded into the background. All that remained was the steady rhythm of a heroic heart beating in paws of gold. Sarah glanced up, and a tentative smile flickered across her face as Apollo inched closer. Gently, she coaxed Lily forward, offering a tiny hand. With hesitant steps, Lily crawled from Sarah's lap and wrapped her arms around Apollo's sturdy neck. The dog leaned in, nuzzling her cheek, his warm fur pressing soothingly against the child's trembling body. "It's okay, Lily," Sarah murmured. "He's here to help." Apollo's presence worked like a salve on frayed nerves. Lily inhaled deeply, her sobs quieting as she stroked Apollo's silky fur. David knelt beside them, placing a reassuring hand on Apollo's flank. "Good boy," he whispered. "You're amazing." Marco Santos observed from a short distance, his own chest heaving from exertion. He watched Apollo transform panic into calm with nothing more than a patient gaze and gentle energy. It was a rare talent, the ability to remind humans that, even after the darkest moments, kindness and courage could light the way. Paramedics moved in to assess Sarah and Lily's condition, but Apollo remained at Lily's side, a silent sentinel. Each time the girl's eyes fluttered with fear, Apollo met her gaze, offering the unspoken promise that she was safe. The river's roar became a distant hum, overtaken by the soft pad of paws on wet grass and the rhythmic heartbeat of a family, finding their center once more. Sarah brushed a damp strand of hair from Lily's forehead and reached down to scratch Apollo behind the ears. He closed his eyes in contentment, tail thumping softly against the muddy ground. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. In that moment, Super Retriever wasn't just a rescuer, he was a healer. His calm presence reminded the Mitchells, and everyone watching, that bravery wasn't only about daring feats. It was also about the quiet comfort offered in the wake of trauma. As the paramedics helped Sarah and Lily into the ambulance, Apollo stood and gave one last look at the family he'd saved. Then, with a swift shake to shed river droplets, he turned toward Marco, readiness shining in his eyes. Rescue wasn't over until every heart was at ease, and Apollo was always ready for the next step in the journey from fear back to hope. Moonlight danced atop the swollen river as Apollo, the golden blur in a crimson cape, circled the submerged sedan one last time. Inside, Sarah, David, and Lily huddled in a shrinking air pocket, hope slipping like water through their fingers. The car's frame creaked, rattled by the relentless current, threatening to collapse at any moment. It was in this dire heartbeat that Super Retriever prepared to perform the impossible. Above the surface, Marco Santos tightened the rope harness around his chest. Emergency lights cast red and blue shadows across the water. Every onlooker held their breath as Apollo dove with measured determination toward the front passenger door, the only remaining barrier between the family and safety. Underwater, Apollo's paws pressed against the slimy rock beneath the car. He swam to the door's latch, where metal and silt had fused into an unyielding mass. For a heartbeat, it seemed the mechanism might never budge, but Apollo's training and his dogged heart knew no limits. He gripped the latch between his powerful jaws, twisting and pulling with every ounce of strength a champion diver could muster. The latch groaned, then snapped free like a cannon blast of air. Water surged into the cabin, but in that torrent lay their miracle. The door hinge had loosened. Apollo darted back toward the opening, signaling with 2 urgent barks. Marco plunged through the window first, arms outstretched, and braced himself against the frame. Sarah and David took their cue. "Together!" Marco's voice was steel. David shoved upward from inside, lifting Lily over the sill, followed by Sarah. The moment Sarah's body broke free of the wreck, Apollo pressed against her leg, steadying her as she gasped for air. Marco hoisted Lily into the roiling current and passed her up to Sarah on the bank. David scrambled out. Next, boots slipping in the mud. As Sarah wrapped a shivering Lily in her arms, she looked down at Apollo, cape torn, fur matted, and felt tears of gratitude burn brighter than any fear. "You did it, boy," she whispered, voice trembling. The word miracle hung on her lips, but Apollo's wagging tail said it all. Behind them, rescue crews flung thermal blankets and guided the Mitchells to dry ground. Marco knelt to check the family for injuries, while Apollo sat proudly at his side, head held high. A handful of spectators pressed camera phones forward, capturing the scene. Mother and daughter safe, father relieved, and the heroic retriever, still vigilant, bathed in the glow of floodlights. Though the river had swallowed their car, it could not consume the courage of a superdog who refused to give up. In that welding of steel and compassion, Super Retriever had unlocked more than a jammed door. He had unlocked a miracle, turning impossible odds into a triumphant deliverance. Across the riverbank, a hush fell before it erupted into cheers. Apollo trotted forward, cape fluttering like a banner of hope. He nudged Lily's hand, inviting one last pat. The little girl obliged, a soft smile breaking through her tears. In her eyes, and in the hearts of everyone watching, Super Retriever's greatest power was clear: the courage to keep trying, even when the currents of fate threatened to pull you under. The surge of icy water that blasted into the cabin after. Apollo's triumphant latch release felt like liquid steel, but it also delivered the momentum the Mitchell family needed. Sarah clung to Lily with one arm while bracing her other hand against the jagged window frame. David planted his feet on the submerged floor mats, using every ounce of strength to push himself and the car toward the opening Apollo had forged. "Now, Lily," Sarah whispered, voice trembling but fierce. She lifted her daughter's small body and guided her through the gap, water sluicing around them in a roaring torrent. Lily's wide eyes gleamed with terror and wonder as she felt Apollo's warm muzzle press against her back from outside, encouraging her onward. David followed, twisting his body sideways to slip through the opening. He grasped Sarah's hand as he emerged, cold rain and river water colliding against his face. Sarah hauled Lily fully onto the bank, her boots sinking into the slick mud. The current still clawed at her legs, but she dug her heels in and staggered, upward, dragging her daughter to safety. Below, David felt the car shift as its weight settled on the rocky ledge. A final groan of tortured metal echoed through the river. He kicked off tangled floor debris and swam toward the bank, buoyed by the thought of his family on dry land. Suddenly, a fresh wave of water broke against the shore, stronger than before. David's legs buckled, and he felt himself being pulled back. Without hesitation, Apollo dove in, paddling fiercely against the current. He reached David's side in seconds, nudging his arm and barking twice, the prearranged signal to grab, hold. Clinging to Apollo's sturdy frame, David allowed the dog to guide him through the shallows. Each stroke brought them closer to the muddy bank where Sarah and Lily waited. Sarah stretched out her arms and grasped David's sleeve, pulling him onto solid ground. Lily ran to her father, wrapping both parents in a tight embrace that trembled with relief. A hush fell as Apollo trotted up, cape dripping and mud-speckled, eyes bright with purpose. He nudged Lily's hand and she laughed, a clear, joyful sound that cut through the night. Sarah knelt beside him, smoothing the wet fur on his neck. "You saved us," she murmured, tears sparkling in her eyes. Behind them, rescue crews finally breached the car's remains and secured the area. The vehicle, once a prison of steel and water, now sat immobile, its windows shattered and doors torn open. But on the riverbank, only one story mattered: how a golden retriever in a Superman cape had led a family from the brink of tragedy back to each other. Paramedics wrapped Sarah and Lily in blankets and led them toward the waiting ambulance. David, still catching his breath, returned to Apollo's side and knelt, pressing his forehead to the dog's. "You're our hero," he whispered. Apollo leaned into the touch, tail wagging with gentle pride. As the ambulance doors closed, Apollo raised his head and surveyed the river. The storm clouds above began to part, revealing a sliver of moonlight that danced across the water's surface. The current steadied, as though acknowledging the bond forged between man, woman, child, and dog. In that moment of stillness, the Mitchells, and everyone who bore witness, understood that true freedom is more than escaping danger. It's breaking, free together, supported by courage, love, and an unwavering friend in a cape. Sarah's legs trembled as she staggered away from the river's edge, Lily wrapped snugly in her arms like a precious bundle of hope. The paramedics guided them onto a stretch of dry grass illuminated by the red and blue flashing lights of emergency vehicles. David followed closely behind, his boots sloshing through puddles, eyes never leaving Apollo as the heroic dog bounded onto the bank beside them. Marco Santos and 2 EMTs knelt to assess Lily's vitals first. Despite her ordeal, she managed a shaky smile for Apollo, who sat attentively at her side, cape fluttering in the cool night breeze. The medic unwrapped a thermal blanket and draped it around Lily's shoulders. Warmth seeped through the fabric, melting away some of the chill that had gripped them all. "Temperatures look stable," the EMT reported, checking her pulse. Sarah exhaled in relief. "Thank you," she whispered, brushing damp hair from Lily's forehead. Lily's small hand reached out to pat Apollo's head. The dog leaned in, letting out a contented sigh that sounded almost like a lullaby. As the EMTs attended to Sarah, wrapping her in a second blanket and monitoring her breathing, David knelt beside Apollo, running a grateful hand along his golden back. Apollo's amber eyes met his, and in that gaze, David saw a silent exchange of gratitude and respect. This was more than rescue. It was a bond forged in shared peril. Behind them, the river's roar had softened to a distant murmur. The once threatening currents were now just water reflecting the emergency lights, reminders of the danger that had passed. Rescue crews began securing the submerged car's remains with cables and buoys, preparing to haul it out at first light. Sarah tightened her hold on Lily's hand and motioned to David. They stepped together toward Apollo, forming a family circle around their canine savior. For a heartbeat, time stood still. 3 hearts beating in unison, pulsing with relief, love, and awe. "You saved our lives," David murmured, voice thick with emotion. Apollo's tail thumped against the grass in quiet affirmation. Sarah pressed her cheek to Apollo's head, inhaling the wet but warm scent of his fur. Lily rested her head against his side, finally calm enough to drift toward sleep. The paramedic who'd been examining Sarah stood and smiled. "You've all been through a lot, but you're safe now," she said. "Thanks to this brave boy." She gestured at Apollo, whose ears perked at the praise. A chorus of applause rose from the gathered responders and onlookers, some wiping tears as they recognized the quiet heroism on display. As the Mitchell family prepared to climb into the ambulance, Lily already curled into a peaceful, exhausted slumber. Apollo sat at attention, watching until they were safely inside. Then, with one last wag of his tail, he turned and padded back toward Marco. The retired firefighter knelt and unclipped Apollo's leash, ruffling his head affectionately. "Outstanding. Work, Apollo," Marco said, voice proud. Apollo leaned into the touch, eyes shining. Together, man and dog stood by the riverbank, silhouettes against the flashing lights, a testament to teamwork, training, and an unbreakable spirit. Farther upstream, the storm clouds had begun to part, revealing a sliver of moonlight that danced across the now calm river. The Mitchells were safe, the car would be recovered, and the night's terror had been transformed into a legend that would be told and retold. Because on this night, safe ashore wasn't just the end of a rescue, it was the beginning of a story about hope, unity, and a golden retriever who wore a cape and carried the hearts of an entire family on his brave, faithful shoulders. The ambulance's rear doors closed with a soft thud, sealing Lily and Sarah inside on stretchers cushioned by warmth and medical care. David stood in the cool night air, his chest heaving as he watched paramedics wheel his wife and daughter toward the waiting vehicle. His gaze then shifted to Apollo, who sat staunchly by Marco's side, cape billowing like a triumphant flag in the gentle breeze. Without hesitation, David crossed the short distance and sank to one knee, arms open. Apollo wasted no time. He bounded forward, tongue lolling, and flopped onto his belly at David's feet. With a grateful laugh, David enveloped the dog in a tight hug, pressing his cheek into the golden fur. "You're part of the family now," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Apollo responded with a soft whine, tail sweeping the grass in contentment. As the ambulance began its slow pull away, its lights flashing a rhythmic promise of safety, David called out, "We'll see." "You at the hospital!" The paramedics gave a thumbs up through the rear window, and Lily's voice, muffled but unmistakably cheerful, called back, "Thank you, Apollo." Marco scooped up Apollo's leash and rose, brushing mud from the dog's paws. "Not everyone can say their best friend is also a superhero," he said, grinning. Apollo nudged Marco's hand, seeking the familiar pat behind the ears. David rose and joined Marco at the riverbank, where the first responders were packing up equipment. The night had settled back into quiet. Only the soft chirp of crickets and the distant rush of water remained. David took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill his lungs. He closed his eyes for a moment, soaking in the stillness and the knowledge that his family was safe. "Let's get you home," David said, slipping an arm around Marco's shoulders. "You and Apollo have earned a hero's rest." Apollo paced in small circles, eyes bright, as if eager for the next adventure. Together, the three made their way up the embankment. Twice, Apollo paused to glance back at the river, once as if bidding farewell to the depths that tested them. Again, to ensure his family was close behind. When they reached the top, David reached into his pocket and produced 3 small wrapped biscuits, the reward he'd promised Apollo earlier. He handed one to Marco, who offered it with a laugh. Apollo caught his treat mid-air with practiced ease, then turned to David for the next. Under the canopy of stars, father, dog, and handler walked side by side down the path toward home. In the distance, the river's roar was a faint reminder of what they'd overcome. Behind them lay a story of terror turned to triumph, of despair drowned by courage. Ahead lay quiet nights, laughter, and the knowledge that no darkness was too deep when love and bravery guided the way. As they rounded the last bend, Apollo paused and looked up at David. In his amber eyes glowed the unspoken promise. Whatever tomorrow's currents might bring, he would be there, cape aloft, heart steadfast, ready to reunite and rescue again. The night air had stilled, the storm clouds retreating to reveal a sky spangled with stars. On the riverbank, the twisted wreckage of the Mitchells' car glinted under the glow of floodlights, a silent monument to both the peril they'd faced and the triumph they'd achieved. Rescue crews worked in hushed reverence, carefully securing cables and winches to haul the sedan from its watery grave at first light. But for the Mitchell family and their heroes, the real work had just begun. Sarah sat wrapped in a warm blanket inside the waiting ambulance. Lily nestled against her side, already drifting into a peaceful sleep. David knelt beside them, gently brushing a damp curl from Lily's forehead. Through the window, he watched. Apollo standing guard just outside, cape fluttering softly in the breeze. When the ambulance doors opened, Sarah and Lily stepped onto solid ground for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Emily, the head paramedic, offered them each hot chocolate in insulated cups, the steam rising like a comforting promise. "You're safe now," she said, her voice kind. Sarah managed a tired smile and raised her cup in a quiet toast to Apollo. Lily giggled and blew on her drink before sipping. David turned to Marco and Apollo, who approached with measured steps. Sarah reached out to stroke Apollo's muzzle. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. Apollo leaned into the touch, ears relaxed and eyes gentle. With a soft thump of his tail, he accepted Sarah's thanks, and then fixed his gaze on the dark river, as if ensuring it would never threaten another family again. Word of the super retriever. Rescue spread quickly through social media and local news stations. By dawn, the story of a golden retriever in a Superman cape saving a child trapped in a car submerged in a raging river had captured hearts across the region. Messages of admiration and relief poured in. Videos of Apollo's heroics went viral, inspiring tributes, memes, and heartfelt thank you notes. A local artist even began sketching posters of Apollo soaring above the river, cape billowing, captioned, "Hope Floats." At the hospital, Sarah and Lily received clean bills of health, aside from minor bruises and lingering chills. Doctors praised Sarah's quick thinking and the paramedics' efficiency, but the family insisted that the true savior was the four-legged hero by their side. Lily presented Apollo with a gleaming Best Hero Ever medal made of chocolate. She took a bite before hanging it around his neck, laughter dancing in her eyes. Apollo accepted his honor with a dignified tail wag, then gently nudged Lily to share his treat. Later that afternoon, the community gathered at the Riverside Park for an impromptu ceremony. Mayor Thompson stood on a makeshift stage flanked by firefighters, EMTs, and local families. "Tonight," he announced, "we honor not only the bravery of our first responders, but the extraordinary courage of one very special dog. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in celebrating Apollo, our very own super retriever." The crowd erupted into cheers as Apollo bounded onto the stage, cape fluttering proudly. Lily ran forward and embraced him, whispering, "You're my hero." In that moment, amid applause and tears of joy, Apollo stood tall on his hind legs, looking every bit the superhero he truly was. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the river in shades of gold and lavender, the Mitchell family, whole and safe, stood together with Marco and Apollo. The current flowed on, indifferent to the night's drama, but in its gentle ripples lay the promise of tomorrow. A promise that, no matter how dark the waters may churn, hope would always rise, embodied in the heart of a golden retriever who donned a cape to change everything. And so, the legend of Super Retriever grew, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their four-legged champions. Whenever someone faces the depths of despair, they'll remember that somewhere, just beyond the swirling currents, a golden retriever in a Superman cape is ready to dive in and change everything.